In the vast prairie where wind speaks ancient truths, love finds those brave enough to hear its call beyond the noise of judgment and fear. The dusty main street of Sunstone lay silent in the afternoon heat, save for the whispered murmurs behind shuttered windows. Emma Richardson walked barefoot across the rough stones, her hands bound with coarse rope, yellow ochre paint marking her face like a scarlet letter. The townspeople had branded her a rebel for refusing to marry the ranch owner's son, a man twice her age with hands that reeked of whiskey and cruelty. Her simple blue dress, torn at the hem, caught on the jagged rocks as Marshall Hayes led her forward, his weathered face avoiding her steady gaze. Reverend Morrison clutched his worn Bible but offered no words of comfort, his congregation watching from their porches with mixture of fascination and fear. Emma's father had abandoned her to this fate, choosing his debts over his daughter's freedom. The women who once shared tea and gossip now turned their backs, afraid to show compassion lest they too face the town's judgment. Emma lifted her chin despite the burning shame, her green eyes blazing with defiance that made the townspeople shift uncomfortably. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The courthouse steps loomed ahead like an altar of humiliation, where the flagpole stood ready to serve as her pillory. Children peeked between their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at this living lesson in obedience. Emma's lips cracked from thirst, but no one offered water to the woman who had dared refuse a man's claim on her life. The rope chafed her wrists raw as Marshall Hayes secured her to the wooden post, the flag above snapping in the prairie wind like a mockery of freedom. The sun beat down mercilessly as the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving her alone with her shame. Hours passed in a haze of heat and humiliation, the yellow ochre paint running down her face in streaks like tears she refused to shed. Mosquitoes swarmed from the nearby creek, adding torment to her punishment as her bound hands couldn't swat them away. Emma closed her eyes and dreamed of the wildflowers beyond the town limits, of running free across the endless prairie where no man could claim ownership of her spirit. As evening shadows began to stretch across the dusty street, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. Steady, unhurried, different from the frantic pace of townspeople. A lone Comanche warrior rode into Sunstone on a paint mustang, his red cotton shirt adorned with a necklace of bear claws that caught the dying sunlight. His long black hair was braided with blue ribbon and eagle feathers, flowing behind him like a banner of freedom in the prairie wind. The townspeople froze in their doorways, hands instinctively moving to their weapons. But the warrior showed no aggression. His dark eyes swept the street with calm assessment before settling on the bound woman at the flagpole. Unlike the others, he saw not a spectacle of shame, but something that stirred recognition deep in his soul. The warrior dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasined feet making no sound on the dusty ground. Marshall Hayes stepped forward nervously, one hand on his gun, but the Comanche's steady gaze held no threat, only a quiet authority that made the lawman hesitate. Emma lifted her head as his shadow fell across her, expecting another curious stare or cruel comment. Instead, she found herself looking into eyes that held depths of understanding, as if he recognized something in her suffering that the townspeople could never comprehend. His presence radiated a peace that seemed to calm even the evening wind. Without breaking eye contact with Emma, the warrior knelt beside her and gently examined her bound wrists, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her raw skin. "Enough," he said in accented English, his voice soft but carrying absolute authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. Marshall Hayes protested weakly about town law and justice, but his words died under the warrior's unwavering stare. The Comanche reached into his leather pouch and withdrew a strip of soft doeskin, carefully wrapping Emma's wounded wrists with the reverence of a healer tending sacred wounds. "You owe these people nothing," the warrior said quietly. His words meant only for Emma's ears as he untied the ropes that bound her to the flagpole. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, yet each movement showed respect for her dignity that no white man had ever offered. Emma felt tears threaten for the first time that day, not from pain or shame, but from the unexpected kindness of this stranger who asked nothing of her but offered everything. When he extended his hand to help her stand, she saw her reflection in his dark eyes and recognized herself not as a fallen woman, but as someone worthy of rescue. The Comanche warrior rose to his full height, his bear claw necklace catching the last rays of sunlight as he faced the gathering crowd. Marshall Hayes found his voice, stammering about local laws and property rights, but his words sounded hollow against the warrior's quiet dignity. "She belongs to this town," the marshal declared, his hand trembling on his gun. The warrior's response was simple and profound. "No person belongs to another." His calm certainty made the townspeople shift uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the ugliness of their actions reflected in this stranger's eyes. Emma stood on unsteady legs, her bare feet finding purchase on the rough wooden steps, as the warrior's gentle hand steadied her elbow. The doeskin wrappings around her wrists felt like silk compared to the coarse rope that had bound her. For the first time in hours, she felt like a human being rather than a cautionary tale. The warrior's presence seemed to wrap around her like a protective shield, and she marveled at how this stranger showed her more respect in minutes than her own community had in years. His quiet strength made her feel safe in a way she'd never experienced. "I choose to go," Emma announced, her voice stronger than she'd expected as she looked directly at Marshal Hayes. The words hung in the evening air like a challenge, and she saw fear flicker in the lawman's eyes, not of the warrior, but of a woman claiming her own freedom. The warrior extended his hand, palm up, offering choice rather than demanding submission. Emma placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses of honest work and the warmth of genuine kindness. The simple gesture sent a shock of recognition through her. This was what partnership should feel like. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as Emma walked beside the warrior to his waiting horse, her head held high despite her torn dress and painted face. He helped her mount behind him with careful attention to her dignity, ensuring she was secure before taking the reins. As they rode slowly down the main street, Emma felt the weight of Sunstone's judgment lifting from her shoulders like chains falling away. The warrior's broad back provided a windbreak against the evening chill, and for the first time in months, she felt hope stirring in her chest like a long-dormant seed finally receiving water. Emma rode behind her silent rescuer across the vast prairie, her trembling caused by something deeper than fear. The rhythmic gait of the paint horse beneath them created a soothing cadence that gradually calmed her racing heart. The warrior's buckskin shirt smelled of sage and wood smoke, carrying the essence of campfires under open skies rather than the stale confines of civilization. He asked no questions about her past or the cruelty she'd endured, somehow understanding that silence was what she needed most. His respectful distance spoke volumes about his character, a man who rescued without expecting payment. As they rode through ancient canyons carved by wind and water, Emma's fingers accidentally brushed against the bear claw necklace at the warrior's throat. She pulled her hand back, expecting anger or demands, but he simply reached up and lifted the sacred ornament over his head. Without words, he placed it gently in her cupped palms, the claws still warm from his skin. The gesture felt profound, like a covenant sealed without vows or witnesses. Emma clutched the necklace to her chest, overwhelmed by the trust this stranger placed in her. Trust that no one in Sunstone had ever shown. The sun hung low on the horizon when the warrior guided his horse toward a sheltered valley where a clear stream wound between cottonwoods. He dismounted first, then helped Emma down with careful attention to her bare feet and tender wrists. His movements were economical yet graceful, each action purposeful as he gathered wood for a fire and filled his water skin from the stream. Emma watched in fascination as he worked, noting how his hands showed the same gentle care with everything he touched, from the horse's bridle to the kindling for their fire. The warrior handed Emma a piece of clean cloth and a bowl of water, then deliberately turned his back to give her privacy for washing. Such consideration from a man was foreign to her experience, and tears of gratitude mixed with the stream water as she carefully cleansed the yellow ochre from her face and hands. The paint dissolved away like the shame that had covered her, revealing her true self beneath. When she finished, she found him seated by the fire, his profile strong against the dancing flames. He offered her dried meat and water without ceremony, treating her as an equal rather than a burden or prize. By the flickering firelight, Emma found courage to ask the question that burned in her chest. "Why did you stop to help me?" The warrior's response came not in words but in action. He reached into his leather pouch and withdrew a hawk feather bound with blue ribbon, the same shade as the strips in his hair. The feather seemed to glow in the firelight as he held it reverently, his dark eyes reflecting depths of meaning she couldn't yet fathom. He touched his chest, then hers, connecting their spirits with this sacred symbol that spoke of recognition and kinship beyond the barriers of race and language. The warrior's gesture with the feather felt like a key, unlocking something deep within Emma's soul. She understood without words that this was more than rescue. It was recognition of something the people of Sunstone had never seen in her. The feather represented freedom, the ability to soar above the petty cruelties of small minds. As he carefully placed it in her hands, Emma felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle. The blue ribbon matched his hair ornaments, creating a connection that transcended the need for spoken vows or promises. That night, the warrior spread his bedroll at a respectful distance from the fire, always listening, always guarding, but never imposing his presence upon her. Emma lay wrapped in the blanket he'd given her, clutching the hawk feather and bear claw necklace like talismans of hope. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, the first words of gratitude she'd spoken in months. The simple phrase carried the weight of her entire soul, and she knew he heard it even though he made no reply. Sleep came easier than it had in years, protected by the presence of someone who asked nothing but offered everything. Dawn brought the scent of wild roses and the sound of the stream singing over stones. Emma woke to find the bear claw necklace around her throat, placed there while she slept, and the hawk feather tucked safely in her hair. The warrior was already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of wild berries and fresh water. Their wordless understanding deepened as they shared the meal, communication flowing through glances and gentle gestures. When she offered him half of her portion, he accepted with a nod that spoke of equality and mutual care, the foundation of something beautiful beginning to bloom between them. Beside a quiet creek where wild sunflowers swayed in the morning breeze, the warrior knelt and began drawing symbols in the sandy bank with a willow twig. Emma watched, fascinated, as he sketched a semicircle above two parallel lines with a single dot in the center. His movements were deliberate and reverent, as if he were composing poetry in an ancient language. When she asked what the symbols meant, he pointed to the dot, then to her, his dark eyes holding warmth that made her heart flutter. The meaning became clear. Home, woman, the center of all that mattered, a place where hearts could rest. Understanding bloomed between them like wildflowers after rain. Emma picked up her own twig and carefully drew two small lines beside his symbols, one slightly longer than the other, representing what could be. When she looked up at him with a shy smile and whispered, "We," his entire face transformed with joy. The simple word carried the weight of possibility, of two souls choosing to walk the same path. His calloused hand covered hers briefly, a touch that sent warmth racing through her veins. Their drawings in the sand became more than symbols. They were blueprints for a life built on mutual respect and understanding. The warrior studied her addition to their sand-drawn future, then nodded with satisfaction that reached his eyes. Emma felt bold enough to ask his name, but he shook his head gently, touching his chest and then gesturing to the open prairie. She understood. He was choosing freedom from the names and roles others had given him, just as she was learning to shed the labels Sunstone had forced upon her. "I don't have a real name either," she confessed, surprising herself with the admission. In this moment, they were simply two spirits recognizing each other across the divide of cultures and pain. They spent the morning by the creek, expanding their sand drawings into elaborate plans that needed no words. The warrior sketched mountains and rivers, showing her the places where his people roamed free. Emma added flowers and gardens, her dreams of peaceful domesticity blending with his visions of wild spaces. When a sudden gust of wind threatened to erase their artwork, they both laughed, the first sound of pure joy Emma had made in months. The drawings would fade, but the understanding between them was permanent, written not in sand, but in the deeper language of hearts recognizing their match. After 4 days of riding through rolling hills and hidden valleys, they reached a secluded grove of wild cherry trees where clear water pooled in natural basins carved by ancient streams. The warrior dismounted and helped Emma down, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. This place felt sacred, untouched by the harsh judgments of civilization. Emma pressed her palm to the earth in silent gratitude while he gathered healing herbs from the surrounding meadow. The air hummed with peace, and she understood why he had brought her here. Not just for rest, but for restoration of her wounded spirit. With gentle expertise, the warrior cleaned Emma's healing wrists and applied fresh poultices of crushed roots and herbs. His touch was that of a healer, reverent and careful, treating her injuries as if they were sacred wounds requiring the utmost attention. Emma marveled at his knowledge of plants and their properties, watching as he selected each herb with the precision of someone taught by generations of wisdom. The cool paste soothed her raw skin, but his tender care healed something deeper, the part of her that had forgotten she was worthy of such gentle treatment. As the sun reached its zenith, Emma found herself studying the warrior's profile as he worked, noting the strong line of his jaw and the concentration in his dark eyes. When their gazes met, neither looked away, and she saw her own growing feelings reflected in his expression. The attraction between them was undeniable but respectful, built on understanding rather than possession. She surprised herself by reaching out to adjust the blanket around his shoulders, her first gesture of care toward him. The simple act felt monumental, marking her transformation from victim to partner. Their peaceful sanctuary was shattered when 4 armed riders appeared on the distant ridge, their silhouettes stark against the afternoon sky. Emma's blood ran cold as she recognized Marshal Hayes and 3 of Sunstone's most prominent citizens, their weapons glinting in the sunlight. The warrior immediately began erasing all traces of their presence, his movements swift and purposeful as he scattered their fire and smoothed the disturbed earth. Without words, he guided Emma behind the massive trunk of an ancient oak, his body positioned protectively between her and the approaching danger. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, carrying the thread of her past catching up to their fragile new beginning. The warrior stepped from behind the oak tree to face the 4 armed men, his hands empty but his bearing radiating quiet strength. Marshal Hayes spurred his horse forward, flanked by the ranch owner whose son Emma had refused, and 2 other town council members. "We've come for the woman," Hayes declared, his voice carrying false authority. "She belongs in Sunstone to face proper justice." The warrior stood unmoved, his silence more powerful than any words. His calm presence seemed to diminish the riders' bluster, making their weapons appear crude and desperate rather than threatening. "Gold was paid for her hand in marriage," growled the ranch owner, his weathered face twisted with indignation. "That makes her our property by law." The ugly words hung in the air like poison, but the warrior's response came soft and sure. "Your gold bought nothing but your own shame." His accented English carried the weight of ancient wisdom, making the townsman's claims sound petty and small. Emma watched from behind the tree, her heart pounding as she witnessed this stranger defend her dignity with words that cut deeper than any blade. When the riders began making threats of force, drawing their weapons with shaking hands, the warrior remained perfectly still. He made no move toward his own knife or the rifle on his horse, instead offering them something they had never possessed: dignity in the face of their own ugliness. Emma could bear hiding no longer. She stepped forward, her chin raised with newfound courage, and stood beside her protector. "I will not return," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "This man has shown me more honor in days than your town showed in years." The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the hills behind the Sunstone men, and a dozen Comanche warriors appeared on the ridge like spirits materializing from the prairie wind. At their head rode a woman with a scar across her left cheek and eagle feathers in her graying hair, her bearing that of a war chief. The townsmen's horses shifted nervously as the Comanche riders descended the slope with fluid grace, surrounding them without aggression but with unmistakable authority. The scarred woman's dark eyes assessed Emma's bear claw necklace and the protective stance of the warrior beside her, understanding passing between them in the ancient language of respect. The Comanche war chief studied Emma's bear claw necklace with eyes that had seen many battles and more wisdom. With a single nod, she accepted Emma into her people's protection, the gesture carrying more weight than any legal document from Sunstone's courthouse. When Marshal Hayes continued his threats about law and order, the chief's response cut through his bluster like a sharp blade. "Your town is smaller than your hearts." Her words held the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through deeds rather than demanded it through force. The surrounding warriors remained motionless, their presence speaking louder than drawn weapons. Without violence or harsh words, the Comanche warriors relieved the townsmen of their weapons, treating them with more courtesy than they deserved. Emma stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the men who had once held power over her life. "This warrior is more my people than you ever were," she declared, her hand finding his arm in a gesture of chosen solidarity. The simple touch conveyed volumes about her decision, and she saw fear flicker in Marshal Hayes's eyes. Not fear of the Comanche, but fear of a woman claiming her own destiny. The war chief turned to Emma with a question unspoken but understood. Would she ride with the band or stay with the lone warrior who had claimed her heart? Emma looked at the woman who offered her a place among strong people who valued courage over conformity, then at the man who had shown her what love without ownership could be. Her choice came without hesitation. "I stay with him," she said simply, her words carrying the weight of a vow. The chief smiled, recognizing the wisdom of two spirits choosing their own path rather than following others' expectations. As the Comanche band prepared to leave, the war chief offered Emma a final gift, a small pouch of sacred herbs and the blessing of her people. "You have chosen well," she said in accented English, her scarred face softening with maternal approval. The warriors departed like prairie wind, leaving the disarmed townsmen to face their long ride home with nothing but their bruised pride. Emma watched Sunstone's representatives retreat, their power broken not by force but by the dignity they could never destroy. She turned to her warrior, ready to begin the life they would build together in freedom. Emma, now called Sunbeam by the tribal children who visited their mountain valley, helped her warrior build their cabin from fallen timber and river stones. Spring had painted the meadows with wildflowers, and their small home took shape like a dream becoming reality. She learned to weave baskets and tend healing herbs while he crafted furniture with the same gentle precision he'd shown in caring for her wounds. Each evening brought small gifts, a carved wooden spoon, a wreath of prairie roses, quiet moments that spoke of love growing stronger through shared labor and mutual respect. The tribal children adopted Emma as their elder sister, teaching her their games and stories while she shared her knowledge of reading and writing. Her warrior watched these interactions with growing warmth, seeing how naturally she fit into the rhythm of their extended family. When autumn brought the first frost, Emma finally found the courage to give him a name that matched her heart. "Blue Wind," she said one evening by their fire, "because you came when everything in my soul had withered, and you brought life back with your quiet, steady presence." Blue Wind accepted his new name with the reverence of receiving a sacred gift, understanding that Emma had claimed the right to name what she loved. Together they carved their names above the cabin door, Sunbeam and Blue Wind, marking their threshold as a place where two souls had chosen to become one family. Winter preparations brought them even closer as they worked side by side, storing food and gathering firewood. Emma marveled at how partnership could feel like this. Equal strength supporting equal strength, neither diminished by the other's gifts. As spring returned to their valley, Emma placed Blue Wind's hand on her growing belly, their wordless communication now including the promise of new life. They expanded their cabin to include a small room for the children they hoped to raise in freedom and love. Their story became legend among both the Comanche band and the scattered homesteaders, not as a tale of rescue, but as proof that two hearts could recognize what others failed to see and create something beautiful from the ashes of cruelty. In their mountain sanctuary, they had built more than a home. They had forged a new definition of family based on choice, respect, and the courage to love without conditions.